Welcome everybody to today's session inspired by National Apprenticeship Week. My name's James Nevin, and I am managing partner at Blue Engineering, a structural engineering firm, and we've been going for about 12 years now. And we took an apprentice on year one, so it's something that is in our blood and want to share with you today. As part of that, we thought it would be good to also get a point of view of a training provider. So London South Bank University, LSBU, Manjinder is joining us from there to tell you about what their offering is and what is available specifically for architecture practices. And then also we have Tina joining us today, who is director at Formed Architects, who quite recently took on their first apprentice, and will be able to share their insight into how it's going and the realities behind setting up an apprenticeship and getting going. So yeah, if you could go to the next slide. So I want to start by talking about how. So at the moment, the company is around 35 staff, and there's about 16 apprentices at the company. All of our apprentices are joined from post A levels, and they're on a level 6 apprenticeship. Level 6 means that they're going and they're getting a degree. So we have apprenticeships in civil engineering. They go on to become our engineers, business management, and software engineer at the moment. And the idea is that as the company grows, there'll be more demand for more apprenticeships and more streams of apprenticeships. And for us, we're now in a position where we've been doing this 9 years and or 10 years. And last year we took on a group of 7 engineering apprentices in one go. It was quite a mouthful to chew, but we had to play catch up off the back of COVID. And it's now we're getting to a point where we're able to streamline and the business model is set. And so I want to explain that a bit about that to you today as well. So a degree apprenticeship bridges the gap from A level straight to degree level. It stops all this intermediate BTECs, HNCs, HNDs, and all of that stuff. Brings you straight up to level 6. We are currently partnered with LSBU, and Manjinder will talk to you about what they do as part of this deal. But this is great for the apprentice. They get a degree for free, and not only do they get a degree for free, they're paid whilst they work. So we have done calculations that show that an apprentice is up about 70 grand over the course of 5 years, which in some ways helps justify the quite low starting wage. Our starting wages at Blues start at 13,500 a year, and they incrementally every year they go up. But sometimes that's viewed as not paying a fair amount. But when you take into account the education base and the professional training that they get, I think it's a fantastic deal. And way more powerful than going to university full time, as we still hire graduate engineers at the moment. They come out and they know a lot about engineering, but they've still never designed a beam, and so you still got to go through that training process with them. So for me, I think there are 3 major barriers for smaller companies when dealing with apprenticeships. The first one is that this mindset that it will be difficult. So straight away, okay, it's going to be the managing partner or a director that needs to go and set all this up, and it's going to be incredibly time consuming, and is it worth it? And am I better off just going and trying to find more clients instead? I think that because of the way the degree apprenticeship is now set up, it's far easier to set up an apprenticeship. Yes, I think that a high level person, director, needs to be the person driving this and being up for it. But it isn't so many hours, and it's not going to suck up a whole bunch of time. I think that the total amount of work would be about a week's worth of work to get this up and running. But then the next thing that is the biggest one, which is adapting the business model. So when we hire apprentices, we don't hire someone and go, oh, we need someone to do more drawing work for us, so we'll hire an apprentice. We don't. We are actually looking forward the full 5 years, and we're going, we want more engineers. We're going to employ apprentices, and as part of their training route, they're going to learn to do the drawing. Then they're going to learn to do simple calculations. Then they're going to build up to be able to do site visits. And eventually, then at the end, they will be very experienced engineers and have their degree. And so having that, building a business model that makes sure that you have a career path for each of your apprentices is really important. I think it is about kind of trying to start with the end in mind and then build up from there and be as open as possible as you can with the apprentice as well. They're incredibly thirsty people normally because they are taking a route that is different to university. They are striking it out. At the moment, it is not normal to do an apprenticeship at degree level. And so you do end up with people who are highly driven, highly motivated. The caliber of applicant onto our program is very high. And I think in order to be considered last year, I think you needed AAB at A level. It was super high caliber. And then the third part is something that is about the maintenance of an apprenticeship. So when you hire these people, they probably have never had a job before. They have just finished A levels where they were spoken to and they took lots of notes, and then a lot of their exams, perhaps they're expected to just spout it back out onto the page. We've got to train these people not only in engineering or in their day-to-day job, but they need to train them in how to be professional. I've had apprentices quite openly watching Star Wars whilst working, and you go over to them and you go, what are you doing? And they're like, oh, just watching Star Wars while I work. And so you've got to be prepared to educate them and understand that they are really starting from a point of naivety. Now that person had all A's at A level and was incredibly intelligent, and his answer was, I'm so sorry, I didn't know. This is how I revised for my A levels. And it's like, okay, cool, but you don't do that anymore. Now we're in a professional environment. So I think understanding that there will be a lot of one-to-one training time is important, and building it into the routines of project work is a great way to do that. What you find is that investment of training pays back over and over again as the years go by. At Blue now, an apprentice joining with us becomes able to prepare drawings on the more simpler projects. They can prepare drawings in 3 months, which for us is great. They really do pay their way, and so it's a great business model for Blue. So I hope that gives you a good overview. I'm going to hand you over now to Manjinder, who's going to talk more about the training provider side of things.
Good afternoon, all, and welcome to National Apprenticeship Week, Day 2. So thank you for James for passing over to me. So I think the important part of today is really to provide you an overview of apprenticeships and in focus of architecture apprenticeships at LSBU. Just going back to the first question is, what is the format of an apprenticeship? Apprenticeship is fundamentally the same as it has been historically. It's about being employed and learning on the job role. As James mentioned earlier, in the traditional trade sectors, that was the formality. With the introduction of the apprenticeship levy and the new standard reforms, we see now degree level apprenticeship programs that range from civil engineering, architectural assistant, and architect programs, and the list goes on. That really changed the sector, but what the sector changed was it was previously led by an awarding organisation, for example, Seating Guilds Pearson's, where they have a list of credits, a modular element, and bespoke in a BTEC, not at the higher level. The form of apprenticeship now is led by employers. What employers did to get any program, let's say an architectural assistant, there was a list of there was employers sitting around a table from large corporations and small organizations to illustrate what is an architect or architectural assistant, what is their knowledge, skills, behaviors, what knowledge do they need to achieve, what skills do they need to achieve, and behaviors to be an architectural assistant part 1 student. And again, they do that for architect at level 7. And they sit around the table to discuss that journey. And we at LSBU develop our qualifications to meet the knowledge, skills, behaviors of the apprenticeship program. And that's really important because we at LSBU can provide majority of the knowledge, some of the skills and some of the behaviors, but we need to work with employers to provide further knowledge within the workplace, greater knowledge of skills and behaviors. As James had provided a great example with the Star Wars, that's watching Star Wars in the workplace is not really acceptable behavior in the professional setting. But we at LSBU, it's hard to teach that because that's not the working world. So that student that has learned the journey of that is not a behavioral trait to have in that profession. So when we talk about apprenticeship, it's about learning in the workplace, but also at the university or college, whichever pedagogy is directed. And what we see now is architecture especially has the opportunity to diversify the talent pool, which we are probably shouting for in the sector, where we want more females and more BAME individuals within the sector, from young talent to all talents. The element of apprenticeship is about widening participation, and it's because employer funds the apprenticeship program and the student gains the apprenticeship, the degree at the end of it through the hard work they have put through with the employer and the university. And this is a great opportunity, and I totally agree with James. The national apprenticeship minimum wage is currently £4.30, will go to £4.81 in April 2022. But I see employers don't really pay at the national apprenticeship minimum wage. They're still competitive, as similar as blue engineering. But what a student can look at is saying, I'm getting a salary and I'm getting a qualification. And that's a great appetite for the sector, especially architecture, which is fundamentally a more expensive program, the traditional route. And that's why this apprenticeship route can diversify the sector. And we've seen that in our cohorts already, and we've got some great examples. So what levels does LSBU offer for architecture? So we offer 2 routes for architecture, and they're both at level 6 and level 7. The level 6 is an architectural assistant, which is a BA honours in architecture. So a student achieving part 1 with REBA and ARB. And we have level 7 March architect, which is achieving part 2 and part 3 throughout on the completion of the apprenticeship program. And then they can register with REBA, for example. So those are the 2 levels that we offer. I think the most important question is about the funding term of it as well. I know that doesn't list there, but the funding term for apprenticeship is really crucial. And this is a lot of the conversation I have with architect employers. The most employer will pay is 5% of the program if they don't meet the 100% allocation. There's also funding available for levy transfer funding, but that's we're probably overcomplicating that, but we can have those kind of conversations offline. But 5% of a 25 grand program at architectural assistant, or 21,000 at a level 7 March architect program, and you're only paying 5% of that program, is a great value return for the employer, because they can bring new talent to the organization, diversify their talent pool, and actually the cost of the program is ineligible costing fundamentally. If we can say we can have 95% discount on any item, let's say car or clothing or anything like that, we're probably grabbing both hands, wouldn't we? And I also have to say, it feels like, how can you pay 5% for a degree qualification and get an accredited program? It sounds outlandish, but that is the case. There is a journey to that as well. Going to the third part is about what qualifications are achieved at the end of the apprenticeship. So a student achieve the part 1, the degree, or part 2, part 3, and the master's degree, but they also receive apprenticeship certification at the end of each apprenticeship program. So they got evidence that they got their degree qualification, but they also will get evidence that they completed an apprenticeship program. So they get extra accolades in regards to learning on the job role. I think when I was at university, when I was applying for jobs, the question that was always asked is, do you have experience? I think we were all asked that, do you have experience? And I was like, how can I have experience? I was at university. And but these students will have that on-the-job experience, and they have that accolades that they can achieve. Also, and this probably James could probably mention a little bit further onto this, is about this provides an opportunity for enriching your workforce, diversifying your workforce, but also enhancing retention in your workforce as well. I mean, that's really crucial to understand. I feel I'm a great advocate for apprenticeships for young talent coming into sectors like architecture, but also career changers, career builders that we talk about more, so that saying they want to come back into education and reskill, especially with post-COVID recovery. That is something big that we see coming up in the near future.
And a common misconception is that at the end of an apprenticeship, you leave the company, but actually you don't. The idea is you stay, and you stay forever.
In that in blue engineering, they stay forever. But you're totally right. I feel you get the loyalty from the talent, and you have this common this journey with that student, and I think it's a great journey, and you do tend to keep them far longer than a traditional student. And so we go on to the last question again. How does an employer partner with LSBU? I want to provide a bit of an indicative timeline about an employer timeline, including with apprenticeships. Firstly, it's about engaging with LSBU or training provider to talk about the apprenticeship program. What fits best for yourself? Are you looking at part 1 or part 2, part 3 student? And identify what will their job will be, and do you understand the compliance element of it, the funding aspect of it, and really understand the apprenticeship at the high level. You don't need to go to the granular level, because LSBU will support you through that journey. Then the next question will be about recruitment. Are you looking at internal candidate to be upskilled? So you may have a part 1 applicant already who's already achieved their architecture BA honours or BSc, whatever that would be, but now you want to put them onto the architect program, or do you want to bring new talent into your organization? So it's something that we can have that conversation. And also, if you want to bring new talent into the organization, LSBU recruited over 100 students for employers across our client base in last September. So we can support through that journey. And that journey differs for each employer, and each employer likes to have it their own way, and we will support on that journey pathway. Once you've recruited the applicant, whichever, if that's new or upskilling, they will go into the admissions process. So the academic will review their portfolio, the qualifications, ensure they hold Maths and English at GCSEs. And once they tick all those boxes, then it will go into contracts and commitment statement and apprenticeship agreement documents. This sounds overly complicated, but we support this journey, and we do via DocuSign. Especially in September 2022, we're going to a new system which will uplift our journey pathway. But this journey is supported with your designated apprenticeship relationship manager or myself to overarch and support this. And then finally, once they complete the contracting and documentations, they will go into enrollment, and enrollment will go into delivery. And then delivery will be either 3 to 4 years, 4 years for the architectural assistant, or 3 years for the architect programs plus endpoint assessments. Then the student achieves graduation. So that's an indicative timeline of that. And then one point I want to make sure here is that apprenticeship is only successful when the employer appreciates and understands what an apprenticeship is. And what we expect as employer to provide a workplace mentor to support them at the job, in the workplace, and that doesn't need to be their line manager. And actually, ideally, it shouldn't be their line manager. It's about support them in the job, challenge them, and we as LSBU will touch base throughout the year to ensure that we see how the student is getting on and the employer, and we challenge that student to be the best architect or architectural assistant they can be, and be the talent and the pioneers for this program. I know I waffled on a lot there, so I'm going to pass over to Tina.
Thank you. So for us as a small architectural practice, just to give you a background as to why we went down the route of hiring an apprentice, we were always really fearful about hiring part 1s because we know that after a year they leave. And critically, that for us meant that, we're investing in their training for that first sort of 3 to 4 months. By the time they start returning any money on that, they're in a position where they're looking forward to going back to university, and then they go back. And so for us, it sort of we started to review that strategy about sort of how do we recruit at that level. And we considered almost making it a condition of taking on a part one, and that they will go down the apprentice route. And that was the only condition we would hire a part one under, that if they then go on and do their part 2 and 3, that they did that on the apprentice route. And then for us, that investment on that training didn't seem like a massive undertaking, because you're spreading that with the risk on return and reward that you get over that 5-year period. And that was a kind of initial starting point on it. And to take it back a little bit, both myself and my business partner Michael, we trained under a part-time route for our part 2s and part 3s, obviously. And so what that meant is that, our employer paid our fees. In those days it was a lot cheaper than it is now, but it meant that we had on the job learning. And as a result, I think real life for us was very different through that sort of part 2 period. Yes, our counterparts were all still going out to the clubs and the bars and all the rest of it, but we were actually learning and earning. And at the end of that period, when we did come out as part 2s and part 3s, we had 5 years worth of project running experience. When we were then going in and looking for jobs, it opened doors for us. And that fundamentally is what we wanted to offer other people through the route. And so the apprenticeship route, which didn't previously exist, does now, and this allows us to do that. So for us, how did we go about, once we realized we wanted to only take on part 1s as apprenticeships, we started advertising on Dizine and saying essentially, start with us and you'll leave as an architect, and then essentially having that conversation through the interview process about essentially this is a condition to your employment with us. And then the other route that we took, when we realized that, actually students aren't really aware about the apprenticeship route, this is something that isn't really well discussed at school level. We started to approach the universities that offer apprenticeships, and we said to them, look, we're a small practice, we do want to take on an apprentice. If you have candidates that might consider this route, please can you open the door and make a connection? And then they go through our recruitment process and the interview process by that route. And so we were starting to get candidates put forward to us by the universities that we'd approached, but also via the traditional advertising routes. And as a result, we whittled it down. And I think the candidate that did come through had never heard of an apprenticeship before that point. And, you think about architects now, when they come out of their degree, as a minimum in terms of fees that they've probably paid just to get to degree level is probably about 27,000. You put another 2 years on top of that, they are crippling themselves with debt with very, very little return on salaries and in the long run. And we just thought it was a major way to make it a little bit more accessible to people from diverse backgrounds, which is something that we really do support. And so it's kind of getting that balance right. And then when the part 1 said, okay, yes, we'll take this condition of employment, that we will go down the apprentice route, we almost leave that choice to them as to which institution they go to if they haven't already come via that institute. And as a result, they're then free to choose, because we'll offer the flexibility as long as they're doing an apprenticeship. For us, it meant that we can invest in their training at that initial stage to make sure that we're taking them through that whole journey. So they went ahead, they made a couple of applications. We had 2 apprentices, one that came in last year, and unfortunately it didn't work out with her. But, she went and applied at Bath, she went and applied at South Bank, and she kept her options open because fundamentally she wanted to check what was possible for her. And I think, giving that freedom of flexibility as to where they go. And I said perhaps that was slightly naive on our part, because we didn't understand what the different institutes provide in terms of apprenticeship training. And I think, the fact that James has such a good partnership with LSBU probably wakens up us to a little bit about how we can improve that process. But what we've spent the initial first few months doing is really embedding that training process, and some of those naive things about people not quite understanding what a job is and being professional. Those are things that we're having to learn. We almost take it for granted, right? You're in a working place, you don't expect people to come in and be watching Star Wars or whatever it might be, and it's like, but hold on a minute, we've given them a job. So we just need to kind of wake up and think about these things. But it is us willing to learn as much as they're willing to learn, and that attitude does need to be right, and that is really important. What we spent the first few months doing is almost mapping out that whole 5-year journey with our candidate to say, at this stage you'll be going through this. Every 6 months is checked in in terms of, so they understand where they're going, because 5 years can seem like a long time when you're, you know, in your early 20s, and just putting that out there just helps them to realize that they don't need to run before they can walk. And I think that's really important, because they think it, you know, people think architects, you know, you come in and you're going to be on site on day one, and it doesn't really always work like that. They need to kind of get themselves to that stage where you can trust them to be on site and all of those other things. So we're quite structured in that process, but we've had to learn to do that in the journey. And I think, you know, mapping that out. So now we're of the view that, again, if we ever take on a part one, and we want to be doing this regularly, a bit like James, every year, having our candidates coming in this route, because what we were really struggling with was finding good people at post-qualification, actually, you know, part three qualified architects that had the right experience. And we realized that actually it's better for us to train them from scratch, at least then when they're come out qualified, you get that loyalty factor, but also you're supporting the next generation and making sure that the crop that's coming out for the future is in a better position. So I think that's kind of our long-term strategy with it all. Now we've put in the hard work on, you know, the first apprentice going forward, where it's sort of systemizing more of our onboarding processes, making more videos that can support somebody, so that, again, you know, it doesn't revolve just around one or two people training them. There's a whole process. It's kind of going through a checklist, making sure that there's rigor in the process, and that learning is trusted by the person taking it on as well. So the apprentice feels like this is actually designed for them. And I think that that's really important. And then those ongoing checking ins and just making sure that they are where they're expecting to be, and regular touch points. But yeah, I don't think you can underestimate just how much more it is a commitment, but it's a commitment that we're prepared to take because we can see the long journey on it. But also, it's one that we wouldn't be prepared to take if it was just a part one, because they'd be going back to university after a year. And I think so many part ones then go on straight on to do their part twos, and then they still come out after 5 years with no experience. And going back to that conversation you were having earlier about sort of, you know, but I don't have any experience. Well, you're stuck, aren't you? So we really want to be able to give people the experience, but under our terms and conditions. And I think that works for all parties. Over to you, James.
Well, it's just making me think there's fewer bad habits as well. I think when you've carved out someone who's professional to your terms, and worked in your way, life is just so much smoother. It's actually helped us build systems in our company of standardization, because you don't have new people coming in at higher levels wanting to disrupt and change, or, well, I prefer it to do my way. So
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the leap of faith for us will be now to take one in at degree level. I think that's the because I think there's still an element of fear around taking on an 18-year-old potentially, but I think, you know, once you've done it once, I think and again, it completely removes any preconception then, doesn't it, about what they might have about industry and all of those things, and really starting from ground zero.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, like I said earlier, we get students that are all A's at A levels, like smart people, who are really thirsty to learn. They, in those situations as well, they have researched apprenticeships. They are coming going, I want an apprenticeship, and because they believe that they will progress faster, and because they are a lot younger than me, it means that you get your office stays a bit fresher and more up to date with technology, and with processes, and they soak up. Like we use AutoCAD in our office, and they learn that so fast, and it's second nature to them, that we're able to choose the things to start them on. So we start them on stuff that's quite technology driven or software driven, because they can pick that up and learn it very quickly. It's quite intuitive to them. And then comes the layering in of the engineering and the design and those bits. And it's worth noting that as the modules increase each year, that's then what unlocks, oh, now they can do some design calculations for us because they've done that module. And so that helps also build up the career path. If you look at what the training provider's module list is each year, and you can kind of map to that. In engineering and in all of the apprenticeships we do, it's 1 day a week day release on essentially the school calendar program. So they stop for a couple of months in the summer, but otherwise it's 1 day per week going up. Is that the same for both the level 6 and level 7 apprenticeships?
Well, yeah, so the delivery model that we have at LSBU are fundamentally day release models like civil engineering. That's same with architecture for level 6 and 7. We do have 1 or 2 programs that we do block delivery, but it fits well for that program. So, but I feel like day release model is great because they can get knowledge and apply it back straight into the workplace, rather than a block delivery and forgot what you learned on Monday.
Yeah.
For some programs, if you look at national delivery, block delivery fits better, for example. But fundamentally, it will be day release model that we have for the architecture programs. I just want to make one point as well, that you just follow on from what you said, James. I think what apprentices do, they bring this fresh identity to an organization. Their charisma, their communication skills are a little bit different as well. And it really freshes the environment up. I remember working in one of my previous organizations, we had a business administration apprentice. I couldn't understand half the words he said sometimes, but it really it's generated the different demographic and the relationships that you build and actually support their development as well, which I think is something, the soft skills that you develop for having an apprenticeship, it works holistically. It doesn't just work one way, it works both ways or in many ways.
Yeah. If anyone has any questions, feel free to unmute yourself or put your hand up, and then we can take those questions. Palika, did we get any questions before this?
Yeah, I have a few. Just to note as well, just because of what you've just said, it sounded like they stopped working during summer, but actually they still work, but they just come in the 5 days a week over summer.
Oh, yeah.
Is that right? Just to make
Yeah, you're right, Palika. And what's worth pointing out on that actually is it actually helps with holiday cover, because suddenly they go to 5 days a week at the time when other staff are going on holiday, including themselves. But we've actually found that to be quite beneficial, that they move to 5 days a week in the summer.
So one question is it okay to start with just 1 apprentice? So James, you mentioned we started with 7 last year, for example. Tina, you said you have 1 at the moment. What would you say is a good number?
And yes, the answer to that is yes. Starting 1 apprentice is perfect. It depends on what your demand is. It's not fitting an apprentice that is not suited for apprenticeship program. It's having the right apprenticeship for the right job description, job role. So that could be, you may have 2 roles. One might be more suitable for apprenticeship. One may more be suitable for a qualified individual. But one way to start the apprenticeship journey is, one is a pragmatic way of going and then see how you develop. Or you may say, actually, we like to have 2 apprenticeships, but there's no number count of how many apprentices should you have. That's a discussion to have with us for allocation, but also to see, can you support the apprenticeship? I feel the question goes back is, imagine having 7 apprenticeships, but you don't have the infrastructure in place to support the apprentices, because in the first 6 months, you have to support them more, so understand the identity of your organization. So this is a conversation to have in regards to resources and supporting mechanisms you have as your organization and team.
What do you think, Tina?
Yeah, I think you'd probably want to use the first one to learn how to do it. And then, then I think once you've got your systems and your infrastructure in place to support it, then it's easier to take on more. But again, it also probably depends on the size of your team. That can also, because the rest of your team does need to buy into this journey. It's not just one person leading it in the office, because everybody's going to have to support these apprentices through that process. If you've got a slightly larger team, I think, taking on more is potentially suitable. But I think you start small, understand how it works, understand if it's something that you can give up as well, because you're giving up some additional time that you might not be doing if you're taking somebody who's sort of a part 3 architect on, and then take it from there. Really, it's got to work with both parties, because you're taking on quite a long-term commitment.
Yeah, for me, maybe it's because I'm just a bit more used to apprenticeships now, but there certainly is benefit in taking them on in 2s, in my experience. So the software engineer role is new at Blue, and we're taking on in 2s. And the reason for that is because then each of them can help each other and work through stuff that they might be stuck on. You have two people asking questions. It doesn't necessarily double the amount of resources within the company to run those people. I agree, you need a place for them in the office, and you need to have work for them to do. But if you do, pairing them up works quite well. Plus, apprentice at the 18-year-old, 19-year-old level, you do have a higher dropout rate. We do have people just change their mind or think, actually, this was not for me. And so in the past, when we had one person and then they dropped out after 3 or 4 months, we were just a bit screwed, because then it's like, well, we can't do anything now till the next. Well, you can employ, but the apprenticeship won't be starting until the following September, very likely. And so for me, I view it as a bit of an insurance policy as a business owner, taking on more than one person. This year, for example, we started with 10 and we are currently now at 7. So it does drop off for various reasons. And I think it's worth pointing out actually that the apprentices are under a standard employment contract. So you do treat them as a normal employee, which means that if they aren't good enough, you aren't committed to keeping them on the course. You can end their employment, and they can go and try and find another employer to take them on the same course, or they can change course, so they can do as they wish. There are milestones as well. So if they get halfway through the apprenticeship, then they can get equivalent qualifying qualifications, which means that then they can transfer into the full-time course in a particular year, if that's the case. Yeah.
Thank you, guys. Another question is, how does the financing of it all work?
So, shall I take this, James?
Go for it.
Yeah, so
don't forget the incentive payment.
Yeah. Okay, so I'll go into the incentive payment later on, but there are two streams for SME organisation. You can be either 100% funded or 95% funded. You do need to get a digital apprenticeship service account to reserve this funding, but I won't go into that detail. But the funding element of it is that if you have 50 employees in the organisation and you recruit an 18-year-old on the day they start the program, so let's say they're 18 in September 2022, that will be 100% funded because you have under 50 employees in your organization. Let's say you have under 50 employees in your organization, but the student is 19 years old on the day they start the program in September 2022, let's say, then you will be invoiced 5% of the program, so 5% of £21,000 at the level 7, and £25,000, 5% of the £25,000 program. Again, ineligible costing, and that'll be invoiced, divided up of the duration of the program, so divided by 4 years for the level 6 and 3 years for the level 7. And you probably wouldn't realize the costing of that is ridiculous, really, for a part 1, part 2, and part 3, a level 6 and level 7 respectively. And again, if you recruited an 18-year-old on the day they start the apprenticeship program, even if you have less than 50 employees, which would be 100% funded, if you have 51 plus employees in the organisation, you'll be 5% charged again. But as an incentive to recruit an 18-year-old on the start day of the program, you'll have £1,000 incentive payment. You'll get that in 2 installments after 90 days and 365 days. I'm getting my numbers mixed up. So you're getting 2 installments of £500 if you recruit an 18-year-old. That is really been in place forever since the introduction of the standards, is to encourage to get young talent into apprenticeships, because we have to realise that apprenticeship, the sea shift change of apprenticeships meant that the demographic increased dramatically from the traditional apprenticeship reforms. But we probably see the decline of that a little bit soon, because saturation of market and everything else in between. You're not really upskilling, you're bringing new talent in. You probably see younger individuals come into apprenticeships, but you do get £1,000 if you recruit an 18-year-old. You can be either 100% funded or 95% as mentioned. There was another incentive payment, but I won't mention that. But if Rishi Sunak changes his mind for September 2022, or Rishi did extend it to 20, actually I may as well go with it. But Rishi Sunak for post-COVID recovery as illustrated, anyone who recruits a new apprentice with the organisation can claim £3,000 incentive payment from the digital apprenticeship service account. And again, you get that in 2 installments, 90 days or 365 days. £3,000 is a good amount of money coming for any organisation. Imagine having 2 apprentices or even 10 apprentices. That money does add up, and some large corporations receive a good amount of money to support, and that really supports your equipment, time away to support these apprentices. But unfortunately, that has finished now end of January. And I have been looking at the fund, like the alerts about the Chancellor, but nothing has been changed. So who knows? We may see additional incentives in the near future. But the only incentive at the moment is £1,000 to recruit an 18-year-old. Thank you.
But also, there's the additional benefit for the employer, which is national insurance contributions. You don't pay national insurance on an apprentice, providing they're under 25. There's a couple of caveats to it that I don't know them inside out, but that's another £1,000 a year saved compared to hiring someone on full rate. Yeah.
Thank you. There's one question for you, James. So you mentioned a high dropout rate. How many apprentices have left you, and how many do you still have at Blue?
Over the 11 years, I don't know the answer. I don't know the answer. I think once it gets to a point where someone's been with us for 5 years or more, it's the apprenticeship is almost an old part of their employment, and then they are a normal employee at Blue, and so you get the usual turnover. With apprentices, we find that there's a high dropout rate in the first few months. That can be because their life, it wasn't quite fitting what they wanted, or it could be that they aren't performing well enough, and they don't pass the probation period. We're quite strict with that at Blue, and it works, I think, to everyone's benefit, because there's no point keeping them on if it's not working very well. Now, for example, we've got 7 left in the latest cohort, and I would expect now that they would drop away in the way a normal employee, in your normal turnover at the company, rather than that be enhanced anymore, now that we're kind of through those first few months. Yeah.
In total, I think there's about 17. Is there 17 apprentices at Blue, and they're over 3 years worth of experience since they started? Just to answer the last part, how many we still have?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
And I just want to know, and I think that's remarkable to have 17 apprentices organisation, and you have your headcount at 35. Is that correct, James? And that's amazing to see here, and we see Blue Engineering as a real advocate for apprenticeships, and especially driving the SME market to see how it does enhance the organisation. Just want to go on retention. I call it the first 6 months is the RAG rating of red. And that's where the high risk is. So after the past 6 months, they tend to stay with the organisation, really, or they are suitable candidates, or they may venture elsewhere, but they tend to stay with the organisation. It's within the first 6 months that they tend to leave.
Thank you. I don't think there is any more questions so far. So James, I'll hand over to you.
Well, look, thank you everyone for joining today. I hope you found it useful. This is going to be going out on social media channels and posted around. So if you have any further questions or anything you want to know, feel free to reach out to us directly, or leave comments in those channels, and we'll get back to you and we'll answer them on those channels. For me, this is I'm also part of London Apprenticeship Ambassador Network, so it's my job to spread the word across small to medium sized companies, and for me, I felt it was quite straight for the number of architects that we have on our books and the number of architects that know nothing about apprenticeships. That was like, right, we should talk about this webinar, because it really is much easier than you might think. And once you get going with it, it really does build momentum. And it does also feel very rewarding to be doing it for these young people coming through and building careers for other people. I get a lot out of it. I think you would too. So thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, Tina, and thank you, Manjinder, for joining, and thank you, Palika, for putting this together.